actually an exact amount, and 1 unit of PRBCs is less than 1 unit, less volume than 1 unit of whole blood, because it's just a component of it. I hope that makes sense. Usually you get around, let's say 320 or so cc's, because that's basically what the hematocrit of that blood was. That's how much of whole blood is red cells. That goes in the fridge. You get 1 unit of plasma, and that is essentially what is left when you spin off the red cells. So it's 200 to 300 cc's of that. And then they freeze it, because a lot of the clotting factors in there are labile. They don't actually last that long. The reason you have them in your body is because you keep making new ones. So if you just park it on the shelf, some of them are going to degrade by the time you get it in a patient. So they freeze it ASAP. It's fresh, frozen. They freeze it while it's fresh, like the fish you get in the store. And then you may get a unit of platelets. Now the confusing thing, these are what would be called whole blood derived platelets. And whole blood derived platelets are not actually all that common, again, in this country, in the United States. Most of the platelets we transfuse are collected by that's a different process. Giving blood, that's not where you go and you get a unit taken out. That's where you go and sit for a few hours. They draw your blood off, spin the platelets out, and then give the rest of your blood back, and you donate a whole bunch of it. You can also pool several donors, but that would be a single donor derived pheresis pack. It means that you have not just, quote, 1 unit's worth, but several. And usually a pack of pheresis platelets is equivalent of 5 to 6 units of platelets. In that process, the platelets in a regular donor blood just stay there. You don't take them out, and they probably end up not functional because they're frozen. They have to be treated as so platelets should be stored at room temperature. They don't seem to That's an area of research. It's of interest to everyone because room temperature platelets don't last that long. For a while until you have to worry about things like infection. Just like you can store your soup on the shelf. And that's why now you also may get a product out of all this called cryoprecipitate. This is like a secondary product of plasma. You take your plasma and they kind of partially thaw it, kind of smoke a little, and then they end up with this sort of sludge on top. It concentrates some of the clotting factors, and they skim it off.
Silver lining has
Really what it is a concentrate of only factor
Yo!
Gillibrand factor, factor 13, often so that is something that maybe gets from plasma. Once it does, that plasma is not so much used. Where does all this stuff go? The blood banking process looks like this. Donor PRBCs are checked for their ABO and Rh type. Everybody has either A or B antigens on their red blood cells, or neither in which case you're O. You need to know that. And then also your Rh type, positive or negative. They screen it also for the infections that we can easily screen for, and other secondary antigens. And usually in the U.S., we leukoreduce it. We're trying to get out most, if not all, of the white blood cells. Because that have no febrile transfusion reactions. Attacked or annoyed the recipient.
Well,
Less now, the thing with this is not quite the same as irradiating the blood. If you ever see irradiated blood, that's a more thorough process of basically killing all sort of like microbes. But we only do that for certain kinds of recipients who are high risk for reactions, really graft versus host. They are so vulnerable that if you give them a few white cells from somebody else, those white cells could actually what does it mean when we say we're going to type and screen?
No, Shadow.
Okay, I don't want to get too lost in this, but just to give you some idea, so you're not saying we're... We talked about A and B antigens, which are found... You can have both, in which case you type A, B. Now, antibodies to A and B antigens are also found naturally. And whatever antigens you don't have, you'll have those antibodies. So if you have no A antigens on your red cell, you have antibodies in your blood. This is different from a lot of you don't have to encounter that antigen and form antibodies. You already have it. Who knows why? Maybe it's you somehow get exposed, bug lands on you. You already have it. Antibody, and we need to know because we don't want to give you blood that has clear antigens, so your antibodies attack you. So we need to know your type. A, B, A, B. We don't want to know your RH type as well. This is a different antigen. You have to be sensitized to this. If you have RH, you'll have no antibodies. If you don't have RH, you won't have antibodies unless you come across RH. Some RH-containing blood gets into your blood. Most often this either happen in utero because a fetus's blood mixes with the mother's. You have a mismatched RH type, or from transfusion. We gave you blood that sensitized you to RH. And in the future, if you get RH-positive blood, you'll to know your ABO type and your RH. It's so important. You need to have at least 2 types performed. So you need to. Now, one of those checks can be historic. So if you've been to the center in the past, a different hospital, and you've had type of screening done there, that can be used. Now the screen portion is looking at non-ABO, non-RH antibodies. And there are a million little proteins or carbohydrates found in red cells that can provoke responses. Again, if it's native to your body, you won't. But if there's one little tail antigen that you don't normally have and your blood somehow, let's say because you had blood transfusion, you may form antibodies. So the screen, the type and screen, is a screen for all those other things. And these are usually from prior transfusions because we don't try to match them. We may give you some Kel-containing blood when you are a non-Kel person, to simplify. We don't worry about that, but in the future, we'll screen you and maybe we'll say, oh, now you have Kel antibodies. Now we're going to avoid giving you blood that has those antigens. The one way you can avoid this is in those pregnant women when you're trying to avoid RH sensitization. We can give them anti-RH immunoglobulins, which help bind up some of those RH before they form that antibody response. Try to limit the risk of sensitizing in the future. If there is a positive antibody, it's all or nothing. They screen for everything at once. It's one big pops up positive. Then the blood bank goes, oh great, he's got antibodies. Now they have to do further testing to identify which antibodies. And then the lab will anti-big Some of these have 1 million transfusions and it's developed 1 million antibodies. Not a lot of blood. Just confirming a blood type. If you're going to transfuse, you need to make sure that you remember that process. Universal red cells would be O mixed. What has no antigen. Negative has no RH antigen. So that blood can go to anyone in their body. We can do with universal plasma. where we're worried about the other way. We're worried about antibodies in the plasma attacking the opposite. Universal plasma, that's from a patient who has A, had those antigens, the body did not make antibodies to them, they don't want to attack themselves, so that plasma.
Calm down, Shadow. I'm trying to think.
Now the cross, phenotyping cross, is making sure there's no reaction. This is just triple checking the ABO compatibility. What they say is they just take a little bit of the donor blood, blood, mix them together, do a quick centrifuge, and see if it obviously reacts. It'll start to clot.
I'll show them
It's
the
called an
meaning of
immediate spin
apathy.
cross match. Sometimes the computer can do something that's called an electronic cross match. If it doesn't work or it's confusing, or the patient has antibodies that we know about, just do a essentially wait longer. Non-ABO like if you have some iron. Like to say, if you have no antibodies, you have a negative antibody screen.
Yo.
So in the past, we used to do a lot of, oh, this patient might need blood. Let's cross a few units of blood just in case. The blood bank will hold it, and then if we need it, it'll be ready to go.
Why does the ship have to do
It's
magic?
still sometimes done, but not as often, and I think it's not very often used, because in a patient with no antibodies, if you need the blood, it's really quick to get blood ready. And then if you don't need it, then doing it preemptively you're using up a resource that, now it'll get returned to the bank if you don't use it, if you remember telling. But now, if they do have antibodies, this may make more sense, because it can sometimes take hours, even days. Most centers will carry some, universal blood that O negative, some subtleties to that.
I'll mope over
Never
here.
mind. For emergency use. But it's done more in trauma centers, and in some of those they'll stock some emergency uncrossed universal blood in the emergency department. Again, as a places are carrying it in the field. Okay. What about all the non-red cell products? What about the plasma? Well, plasma is also tight matched. Remember, AB positive would be universal, although for subtle reasons, typically A plasma do most recipients usually don't have a reaction, which is good because AB is. We usually screen the plasma for antibodies when it's done, and if you do have that positive antibody screen, they just don't use their plasma for donor plasma. So we don't need to screen the plasma for that. It's already known. Platelets. Again, usually collected by forensics. Blood bank perspective. They're not usually but a lot of them are sort of their own thing. There's something called HLA engines. Those are things that develop, and they're kind of hard to test. Platelet counts 10, you give it some platelets, and then half an hour later the platelet counts like still 10. Sometimes the reason is because of antibodies. And there is workup that can be done by the blood bank to look for some of those particular antibodies and things you can do starting the donor from home. It's similar to how they do kind of its own.
Oh, such a disgusting cheater.
It's usually given just for specific needs like low fibrinogen, but the cross matching is done at the same time.
Leave me alone. I'm sleeping. Ugh. Get that. Ugh. Death is the true meaning of life. Whoa, that's deep. This place is so...
What is this? 833 out of nowhere? Yo.
Wasn't as cool as I thought it'd be. Shadow, just leave me. As my eyes can roll.
if that was really
because I hate it.
He says, on second thought.
Shadow. Oh, where are we going?
Hello, my
You
baby.
know what? It doesn't matter.
Okay. So my second takeaway for you as we get into the indications to transfuse is that most of the time, in general, our tendency is probably to over-transfuse, or at least let's say we transfuse more than we probably must. We think too much about the harms of not having enough of some blood count, and maybe too little about the harms of transfusion. So when should you transfuse? The kind of bog standard indication to transfuse red cells is a hemoglobin of less than 7. This is grams per deciliter. Or a hematocrit of less than 21% if you're a hematocrit person. Same thing. This is because, in general, we've had good studies showing that in routine patients, letting them get that anemic is safe. Now, it's not necessarily because 6 would not be as safe as 7, or 5 would not be as safe as 6. They just haven't done that study yet. And in the past, we kept people higher, more like 10 or more. So once we got down to 7, that was, a big deal already. Maybe you'll be the one to do the next trial showing we can go even lower. The most common indication for transfusion in the ICU in a patient who's not actively bleeding is just kind of topping them up. Everybody ends up anemic once they've been here a little while. We draw blood for phlebotomy, for labs. Inflammation suppresses their production of new blood cells. We call it anemia of chronic disease and chronic conditions. A lot of our patients are more acute, but it's the same idea, inflammation. They get diluted from fluids. So everyone who comes here, if they weren't anemic already, they end up with a hemoglobin of like 8 to 10 or something. That's just like the standard. But they hang around for a few days, it drifts down, and now yesterday they